The lights in the arena were dazzling, and the crowd roared with deafening excitement, their voices merging into a singular thunder that reverberated through every corner of the venue. On stage, Diana strutted to the edge of the spotlight, her sequined dress catching every beam of light, turning her into a living spectacle. She basked in their adoration, her lips curling into a smug smile as she raised her arms to silence the crowd. They obeyed instantly, their cheers fading into an anticipatory hush. "You're all here for me," she purred into the microphone, her voice dripping with confidence. "And I promise, I won't disappoint." Backstage, Maria adjusted her mic stand in a dimly lit corner. She didn't belong under the bright lights, at least, not according to Diana. Her role was clear: blend in, harmonize, and stay invisible. The band rehearsed around her, instruments tuning and voices humming as the crew rushed about. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she tightened the mic stand. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Singing wasn't just a job to her, it was her lifeline. Every paycheck meant keeping the electricity on back home, paying for her mother's medications, and ensuring her little sister Ellie could focus on school instead of worrying about bills. "Maria." Diana's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. Maria flinched instinctively, her fingers gripping the stand tighter. Diana stormed into the rehearsal area, her long heels clicking against the concrete floor with a rhythm that demanded attention. Behind her trailed her manager, an unassuming man with a clipboard and a perpetually tired expression. He offered a faint, apologetic smile to Maria, but said nothing, as always. Maria straightened herself, her face calm, though her stomach churned. Diana stopped a few feet away, crossing her arms and letting her gaze sweep over Maria like she was inspecting a piece of furniture she regretted buying. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Diana asked, her tone dripping with condescension. Maria's throat felt dry, but she managed to answer softly. "Just rehearsing my part, for the bridge in." "I didn't ask for an essay," Diana interrupted, rolling her eyes. "You're not the star, Maria. Backup singers belong in the background. That's why they're called backup singers. You're not paid to shine. You're paid to make me sound better. Understand?" Maria nodded, swallowing the lump forming in her throat. "Yes, Diana." "Good," Diana snapped, her eyes narrowing. "Because the last thing this audience needs is to get distracted by mediocrity." Her lips curled into a smirk as she turned on her heel and strutted away, leaving Maria frozen in place. The manager lingered for a moment, his lips parting like he might say something, but instead, he just adjusted his glasses and followed Diana. Maria took a shaky breath, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill. "Not here. Not now." She looked around, catching a few sympathetic glances from the band members, but no one said a word. They never did. Speaking up could mean losing the gig, and no one could afford that. Maria understood. She'd learned long ago to keep her head down and focus on her work. It was safer that way. The rehearsals ended, and Maria slipped into a corner of the backstage area where she could breathe without feeling the weight of everyone's judgment. She sat on a folding chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The hum of activity buzzed around her, but she felt alone, her mind replaying Diana's words over and over. Mediocrity. The word cut deeper than it should have. Maria had spent her whole life fighting that label. She closed her eyes, picturing her mother's warm smile and Ellie's laughter. They were why she endured this. They were why she had to keep going. "Maria," a familiar, cheerful voice called out, jolting her from her thoughts. She turned to see Ellie running toward her, clutching a small notebook in her hands. Maria's heart swelled at the sight of her little sister, her curly hair bouncing as she weaved through the backstage crew. "Ellie," Maria said, her voice softening as she stood and pulled her sister into a tight hug. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at home." "I wanted to surprise you." Ellie beamed up at her, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "You were amazing during rehearsals, I saw from the side." Maria chuckled, brushing a stray curl from Ellie's face. "I'm glad you're here, but you know you're not supposed to be wandering around like this." "I just wanted to see you, and maybe get an autograph," Ellie said, holding up the notebook. "From Diana. Do you think she'd sign it?" Maria's smile faltered, her heart sinking. Ellie didn't know. How could she? To her, Diana was a superstar, someone to admire. Maria hesitated, glancing toward the rehearsal area where Diana was surrounded by assistants and makeup artists. "Please?" Ellie asked, her voice so hopeful it broke Maria's heart. "Okay," Maria said quietly, taking Ellie's hand. but stay close to me. They approached Diana cautiously, Maria's grip on Ellie's hand tightening with every step. Diana was mid-conversation, her laughter echoing sharply against the walls. When she noticed Maria, her smile faded into a scowl. "What now?" Diana asked, exasperated. Maria hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "My sister, she's a fan. She was wondering if you could sign this for her." Diana's eyes flicked to Ellie, then to the notebook in her hands. For a moment Maria thought she might agree. But then Diana's expression twisted into a look of mock pity. "Oh sweetie," she said, crouching slightly to meet Ellie's gaze. "You don't want my autograph. Trust me, it wouldn't mean much." She straightened, her tone turning icy as she addressed Maria. "I don't have time for this. Maybe you should teach your sister about boundaries." Ellie's face fell, her excitement fading into confusion. Maria felt the heat rising in her cheeks, a mixture of anger and shame swirling in her chest. "I'm sorry," she said softly, pulling Ellie back before Diana could say anything more. They walked away, Maria's heart heavy as she guided Ellie toward the exit. "She didn't mean it," Maria said, her voice trembling slightly. "She's just busy." Ellie looked up at her, her brows furrowing. Why was she so mean? Maria didn't have an answer. Instead, she crouched down, looking into Ellie's eyes. "One day," she said quietly, "you won't need her autograph. You'll have mine instead." Ellie smiled faintly, nodding, though she didn't quite understand what Maria meant. But Maria did. The promise echoed in her heart, solidifying into something stronger than the humiliation and anger she felt. One day, she'd prove herself. Not just to Diana, but to everyone. One day the spotlight would be hers. Maria stood by the kitchen sink, her hands submerged in soapy water as the faint hum of her mother's oxygen machine echoed from the other room. The smell of lavender dish soap mixed with the aroma of stew simmering on the stove. It was a routine, one she had grown used to, even if it left little room for anything else. Behind her, the radio played softly, and every so often, Maria would hum along to the tune, her voice carrying a warmth that seemed to fill the small apartment. But the music didn't drown out the weight in her chest, the unshakable feeling that no matter how hard she tried, she was always one step away from losing everything. "Maria, is that you?" Her mother called weakly from the living room, her voice barely audible over the hum of the machine. Maria wiped her hands on a towel and walked over, kneeling by her mother's side. Her mother's face was pale, her eyes clouded with the exhaustion of someone who had been battling illness for far too long. "I'm here, Mama," Maria said gently, tucking a blanket around her. "Do you need anything?" Her mother shook her head slowly, a faint smile on her lips. "Just hearing you sing would be enough," she whispered. Maria hesitated. Singing always made her mother happy, but lately it felt like her voice had been locked away, silenced by fear and exhaustion. Still she nodded, her throat tightening as she began to hum softly, the notes weaving through the air like a fragile thread. Her mother closed her eyes, her breathing evening out as Maria's song filled the room. When her mother finally fell asleep, Maria stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. She thought about her father, about how he used to tell her that her voice was a gift. "You've got something special, Marie," he'd say, his eyes lighting up with pride. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." But her father was gone now, and his words felt like echoes in an empty room. Maria's phone buzzed on the counter, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her mentor, Mr. Ramirez, the music teacher who had taken her under his wing when she was just a shy teenager afraid to sing in front of the class. "Maria, you need to take this opportunity," the message read. "I know you're scared, but you can't let fear stop you from chasing your dream." Maria sighed, her fingers hovering over the screen. She knew he was right, but fear wasn't the only thing holding her back. She couldn't afford to take risks, not when her family depended on her. Singing backup for Diana wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. And right now, that was all that mattered. The next morning, Maria arrived at the studio for another grueling rehearsal. The moment she walked in, she could feel the tension in the air. Diana was already there, barking orders at the sound technician as she sipped an expensive-looking latte. "Maria, you're late," Diana snapped. Though Maria was exactly on time. "We don't have all day to wait for you to get your act together." Maria bit back a retort, forcing herself to stay calm. "Sorry," she said quietly, moving to her spot. Diana's eyes narrowed as she watched Maria set up her microphone. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "you really should be more grateful. There are plenty of girls who kill for this job." Maria didn't respond. She knew better than to engage. Instead, she focused on the sheet music in front of her, willing herself to block out Diana's voice. But it wasn't just Diana. It was the whole environment. The subtle jabs, the condescending glances, the way everyone tiptoed around Diana's moods. Maria had learned to navigate it, but every day felt like a battle. As the rehearsal dragged on, Maria's mind drifted to the first time she had ever sung in front of an audience. It was at her father's funeral, a small gathering of family and friends in their neighborhood church. She had been just 14, her hands trembling as she clutched the microphone. But when she opened her mouth to sing, something inside her shifted. Her voice rose above the grief, carrying a sense of hope and strength that even she hadn't known she possessed. Maria. Diana's sharp voice yanked her back to the present. Are you even paying attention? You're dragging the tempo. Maria blinked, heat rising to her cheeks. Sorry, she murmured, adjusting her timing. Diana rolled her eyes, muttering something under her breath that made the other singers chuckle. Maria clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She wanted to scream, to tell Diana exactly what she thought of her. But she didn't. Instead, she swallowed her pride and kept singing, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Later that evening, Maria stopped by Mr. Ramirez's small studio, the familiar smell of sheet music and coffee greeting her as she walked in. You're late, he said, though his tone was warm. Sorry, Maria said, setting her bag down. Rehearsal ran over. Mr. Ramirez nodded, handing her a piece of music. Let's see what you've got, he said, sitting down at the piano. Maria took a deep breath and began to sing, her voice filling the room with a raw, emotional power that seemed to surprise even her. When she finished, Mr. Ramirez leaned back, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. That, he said, is the voice of someone who doesn't belong in the background. Maria shook her head. I can't, Mr. Ramirez, not right now. My mom needs me, Ellie needs me, and I can't risk losing my job. I understand, he said, his voice gentle. But Maria, you have a gift. And if you don't use it, you're doing the world a disservice. Maria didn't know what to say. She wanted to believe him, to believe that her voice could take her somewhere. But the weight of her responsibilities felt too heavy to ignore. As she left the studio, her phone buzzed with another message. This time, it was Ellie. Maria, can we have pizza for dinner? Please? Maria smiled, her heart aching with love for her little sister. She texted back, of course, and headed home, determined to push her doubts aside. But as she walked through the door of their apartment, the smell of lavender dish soap and the hum of her mother's oxygen machine greeted her once again, a reminder of everything she stood to lose. Maria set the pizza box on the counter and hugged Ellie tightly, promising herself that no matter what, she would find a way to give her family the life they deserved. That night, as Maria lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, she thought about her father's words. You've got something special, Mary. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Maybe he was right. Maybe she did have something special. But how could she hold on to it when the world seemed so determined to make her feel small? Maria closed her eyes, the weight of the day pressing down on her. Tomorrow would be another battle. Another round of keeping her head down and surviving, but deep in her heart, a spark of hope flickered, fragile but unyielding. She wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The spotlight blazed down on the stage, throwing a stark glow on Diana as she rehearsed, her glittering outfit reflecting light in dazzling shards. Her voice soared through the empty auditorium, hitting high notes with practiced precision. The band played behind her, their music tight, their focus unbroken. Maria stood off to the side, her microphone clutched in her hands, waiting for her cue. Her heart raced, though she had done this 100 times before. Each rehearsal felt like walking on glass, knowing that one wrong step could shatter everything. Stop, stop, stop. Diana's voice pierced through the music, sharp and annoyed. She raised a hand, her perfectly manicured fingers gleaming under the lights. The music cut off abruptly, leaving an awkward silence in its wake. What is this? Diana snapped, turning toward the band, then toward Maria. Why does it sound like someone is trying to upstage me? The band members exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. Maria felt their eyes flicker to her and then away, their discomfort tangible. She straightened her back, her fingers tightening around the microphone. I was just following the arrangement, Maria said quietly, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. The arrangement? Diana echoed, her tone mocking. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the stage floor like the ticking of a countdown. The arrangement is for you to support me. Not to show off, not to draw attention to yourself. Honestly, Maria, it's like you don't know your place. Maria's stomach twisted, but she held her ground. I wasn't trying to. Diana cut her off with a sharp laugh. Oh, save it. I know exactly what you were trying to do. You think you're special because you can carry a tune. Let me remind you, the audience isn't here for you, they're here for me. She gestured grandly to the empty seats, as if the applause of an imaginary crowd were echoing around her. Maria opened her mouth to respond, but the words stuck in her throat. She glanced at the band, hoping for some support, but they were all carefully looking at their instruments, their faces blank. Even the stagehands pretended to be busy, moving equipment that didn't need moving. The silence pressed down on Maria like a weight, and for a moment, she felt small, insignificant, and utterly alone. But then she remembered her mother's words, spoken so many years ago when Maria was just a shy girl afraid to sing at a school talent show. Your voice is your power, Maria. Don't let anyone take it from you. The memory surged through her like a spark, igniting something deep inside. She looked up, meeting Diana's gaze head-on. With all due respect, Maria said, her voice calm but firm, I wasn't trying to upstage you. I was doing my job, making the music better. If that's a problem, maybe we should talk about why the focus isn't on the music in the first place. The air in the room shifted. A faint gasp came from one of the backup singers, quickly stifled. Diana froze, her eyes narrowing as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. For a moment, the entire stage seemed suspended in time, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. You have some nerve, Diana said finally, her voice low and dangerous. She took another step forward, towering over Maria, her presence almost suffocating. Do you know how many people would kill to be in your position? And here you are, acting like you're owed something. Newsflash, sweetheart, you're replaceable. So unless you want to find yourself back singing at dive bars for tips, I suggest you keep your mouth shut and do as you're told. Maria's heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to back down. I'm not trying to disrespect you, Diana, she said, her voice unwavering. But respect goes both ways. Diana's lips curled into a cold smile. Is that so? She stepped back, her tone turning icy. Fine. Let's see how far respect gets you when I'm the one signing the checks. The tension in the room was so thick it was almost unbearable. Maria felt her palms sweating, her mind racing with everything she wanted to say but couldn't. She knew Diana was powerful, and pushing her too far could mean losing her job. But staying silent meant losing a piece of herself. And that was a price Maria wasn't willing to pay. Before Diana could say anything else, a voice broke through the silence. Interesting, it said, smooth and measured. Everyone turned to see a man standing near the back of the auditorium, his sharp suit and confident posture immediately commanding attention. He clapped his hands slowly, his expression unreadable. Mr. Allen, Diana said, her voice suddenly sweet and demure. I didn't realize you were here. Well, I wasn't planning on staying long, Mr. Allen said, strolling toward the stage. But I couldn't help but notice the tension. His eyes flicked to Maria, then back to Diana. Care to explain what's going on? Oh, it's nothing, Diana said with a laugh that sounded forced. Just a little misunderstanding. Maria here was getting a bit carried away, but we sorted it out. Haven't we, Maria? Maria hesitated, every instinct telling her to nod and let it go. But something in Mr. Allen's gaze encouraged her, a silent challenge to speak her truth. I was just trying to do my best, Maria said carefully. But it seems that sometimes doing your best isn't what's wanted. Mr. Allen raised an eyebrow, his interest clearly piqued. Is that so? He looked at Diana, his smile faint but pointed. Diana, I thought you valued talent on your team. Or have I been misinformed? Diana's expression tightened, but she quickly recovered. Of course I do, she said smoothly. Maria's a great backup singer. She just needs to remember her role. Mr. Allen murmured, his gaze lingering on Maria. I'll be keeping an eye on this. He turned to leave, but not before giving Maria a small, almost imperceptible nod. As the door closed behind him, Diana turned back to Maria, her smile gone. Consider this your one and only warning, she hissed. Step out of line again, and you'll regret it. Maria didn't respond. She didn't need to. The spark inside her was no longer just a flicker, it was a flame. And for the first time, she felt like it might just be enough to burn through the walls Diana had built around her. The room was small, barely big enough to fit the upright piano pushed into one corner and the mismatched chairs scattered around. Dust motes danced in the slanted sunlight streaming through a cracked window. Maria sat on the worn bench, her fingers brushing over the yellowed keys of the piano. Her heart pounded, and the silence pressed heavily around her, broken only by the creak of the door as Mr. Ramirez entered, his familiar warm smile lighting up his face. "It's been too long, Maria," he said, setting a pile of sheet music on the nearby desk. "Too long," Maria agreed softly, her voice tinged with guilt. She hadn't stepped into his studio in years, not since she started working as a backup singer for Diana. Life had been too chaotic, too demanding. But now sitting here, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't known she was missing. "Tell me," Mr. Ramirez said, pulling up a chair and sitting across from her, "why now? What's changed?" Maria hesitated. The truth felt fragile, almost too big to say out loud. "I'm tired of being invisible," she admitted finally, her hands twisting in her lap. "I love music, but singing backup, it feels like I'm shrinking, like I'm losing myself." Mr. Ramirez studied her for a moment, his gaze sharp but kind. "You're not invisible, Maria. Not to the people who matter. And certainly not to me. But if you want to step out of the shadows, you'll have to take risks." Maria nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'm ready," she said, though a flicker of doubt still lingered in her chest. "Good," he said, standing and walking over to the desk. He picked up a folder and handed it to her. "This is someone I want you to meet. His name is Sam. He's a producer, not a big shot like the people Diana works with, but he has an ear for real talent. He's looking for something fresh, something different. I think you might be exactly what he's looking for." Maria opened the folder, her fingers brushing over the contact information inside. It felt surreal, like a door she hadn't dared to imagine was suddenly opening in front of her. "Thank you, Mr. Ramirez," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. "Don't thank me yet," he said with a chuckle. "The real work is just beginning." A week later, Maria found herself standing in a small, unassuming recording studio. The walls were lined with foam panels, and the faint smell of coffee and old vinyl hung in the air. Sam, the producer, was a young man with sharp eyes and an easy smile. He greeted her warmly, gesturing for her to sit. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "Ramirez tells me you've got a voice that could change the game. Let's hear it." Maria's palms were sweaty as she stepped into the recording booth. She adjusted the headphones and glanced at the microphone in front of her, its sleek surface reflecting her nervous expression. Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes and let the first note escape her lips. The sound filled the room, pure and haunting, a mix of classical control and modern emotion. She lost herself in the music, her voice weaving through the melody like it had a life of its own. When she finished, the silence was deafening. She opened her eyes, her heart hammering as she looked at Sam through the glass. He was staring at her, his mouth slightly open. "That," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "was incredible." Maria felt a flush of pride rise to her cheeks. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, not as part of a backdrop, but as herself. The days that followed were a whirlwind of late-night recording sessions and endless hours of perfecting her sound. Maria discovered a style that was uniquely hers, blending the techniques her father had taught her with the modern influences she had absorbed from working in the industry. Sam pushed her to experiment, to take risks, and with each session, Maria felt her confidence grow. But not everyone was pleased with her newfound boldness. Word of her recordings reached Diana, and it didn't take long for her jealousy to surface. During a rehearsal for an upcoming concert, Diana cornered Maria backstage, her eyes blazing with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" Diana hissed, her voice low but sharp. Maria frowned, confused. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play dumb with me," Diana snapped. "I heard about your little studio sessions. Do you think I'm stupid? You're trying to make a name for yourself, aren't you? Trying to steal the spotlight?" Maria straightened her back, meeting Diana's glare. "I'm just exploring opportunities. It has nothing to do with you." "Everything you do has to do with me," Diana shot back. "You're nothing without this job. Without me. Don't forget that." Maria clenched her fists, her frustration boiling over. "I'm not trying to take anything from you, Diana. I'm just trying to find my own voice." "Well, let me make something clear," Diana said, stepping closer. "There's only room for one star here, and it's not going to be you." The tension between them was palpable, but Maria refused to back down. She held Diana's gaze, her silence speaking volumes. The concert arrived faster than Maria had anticipated. The venue was packed, the energy electric as the crowd buzzed with anticipation. Maria stood backstage, her nerves frayed but her determination unshaken. She had a small solo during one of the songs, a chance to show the audience a glimpse of what she could do. As the show began, Maria felt the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Diana was in her element, commanding the stage with her usual flair. But Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The band seemed tense, their eyes darting toward the sound crew more than usual. When it was finally Maria's moment, she stepped forward, her heart pounding as the spotlight found her. The music swelled, and she opened her mouth to sing, but the sound that came out was garbled, distorted by a sudden technical failure. The audience murmured in confusion, and Maria froze, her mind racing. She glanced toward the sound booth and saw Diana smirking from the corner of the stage. It was sabotage. Maria knew it in her gut, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. Taking a deep breath, she stepped away from the microphone and projected her voice into the auditorium. The raw power of her unamplified singing filled the space, silencing the crowd. Her voice soared, unencumbered by technology, and for the first time that night, the spotlight truly felt like it belonged to her. When she finished, the audience erupted into applause, their cheers shaking the walls. Maria glanced at Diana, whose smile had vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Backstage, Maria was greeted by Sam, his face alight with excitement. "That was unbelievable," he said, gripping her shoulders. "You just turned a disaster into a moment. People are going to remember this." Maria smiled, the weight of the night finally lifting. She had faced the sabotage, the humiliation, and the doubt, and she had risen above it. For the first time, she felt unstoppable. But as she looked back toward the stage, she knew the battle was far from over. Diana wasn't done with her, and the road ahead would only get tougher. But Maria wasn't afraid. She had found her voice, and she was ready to fight for it. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Maria sat at the small kitchen table, staring at her phone. The email she'd been waiting for all week had finally arrived, but her fingers trembled as she hesitated to open it. The subject line read, "Contract approval, let's get started." She exhaled sharply, her heart pounding as she tapped the screen. The words blurred for a moment, her mind racing with disbelief. It was real. Sam had pulled through, and she was officially signed to his production label. This was her chance. Her hands shook as she read the details. It wasn't a huge deal, just a tentative contract with room for development, but it was a start, a lifeline toward the dream she held onto for so long. Her mother's voice broke the silence from the next room, soft but tinged with exhaustion. "Maria, are you all right?" Maria blinked and quickly composed herself. "I'm fine, Mama," she called back. Though her voice wavered slightly, she stood and walked into the living room, where her mother sat in her usual spot on the worn couch, a blanket draped over her lap. The oxygen machine beside her hummed softly, a constant reminder of how fragile life could be. Her mother smiled weakly, her eyes filled with warmth despite the weariness on her face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Maria chuckled softly, sitting beside her. "No ghosts, just big news. I signed a deal with a producer." Her mother's smile widened, pride flickering in her tired eyes. "That's wonderful, Maria. Your father would be so proud." The mention of her father made Maria's throat tighten, but she nodded, her resolve hardening. She had to make this work, not just for herself but for her family. Her mother's health was declining, and the medical bills were piling up. Maria couldn't afford to let this opportunity slip away. The next day at rehearsal, Maria couldn't hide the spring in her step. The thought of finally working on her own music filled her with a newfound confidence, one that didn't go unnoticed. Diana was already on stage, her commanding presence sucking the air out of the room as usual. She glanced over at Maria, her eyes narrowing. Something about Maria's demeanor irritated her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. "Maria," Diana called, her tone sugary sweet but laced with venom. "You seem awfully cheerful today. Care to share with the class?" Maria hesitated, the weight of Diana's gaze heavy on her. "It's nothing," she said quietly, keeping her head down. Diana wasn't satisfied. She sauntered over, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "Come on," she pressed, her voice dripping with faux curiosity. "What's got you so happy? A new boyfriend? A promotion?" She leaned in closer, her smile sharp. "Or maybe you finally realize you're better off staying in the background where you belong." Maria's stomach churned. But she refused to let Diana's words get to her. "I'm just focused on the music," she replied evenly, meeting Diana's gaze for a fleeting second. Diana's smile faltered, but only for a moment. She sniffed and turned away, waving her hand dismissively. "Good, let's keep it that way." Maria thought the conversation was over, but she underestimated Diana. That afternoon, rumors began circulating through the industry. Whispers of Maria being difficult to work with and unreliable spread like wildfire. She started receiving cold responses from people she'd been building connections with, and some outright stopped replying to her messages. It didn't take long for Maria to realize who was behind it. One evening, she sat on her bed with her laptop, scrolling through emails filled with polite rejections. Each one felt like a punch to the gut. She glanced at her phone, where a missed call from Sam sat on the screen. When she called him back, his voice was apologetic but firm. "Maria, I don't know what's going on, but I've been hearing some things. People are saying you're, well, not a team player. It's making things harder for us." Maria's chest tightened. "Sam, you know that's not true. I've been giving this everything I have." "I know," he said quickly. "I believe you. But perception matters in this industry. We need to figure out how to turn this around." After the call ended, Maria sat in the dark, the glow of the screen illuminating her tear-streaked face. She thought about her mother, her little sister Ellie, the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. The medical bills weren't going away. And now this campaign to destroy her before she even started. She felt trapped, as though the walls were closing in. The next morning, Ellie found Maria in the kitchen, staring at a cold cup of coffee. "What's wrong?" Ellie asked, her young face full of concern. Maria forced a smile, but Ellie wasn't fooled. She pulled up a chair and placed her small hand over Maria's. "You're always telling me to keep trying, even when it's hard," Ellie said softly. "So why can't you do the same?" Maria looked at her sister, her heart aching. Ellie was only 13, but she carried a wisdom far beyond her years. "It's not that simple," Maria said quietly. "Maybe not," Ellie replied, her eyes fierce. "But you're Maria. You're the strongest person I know. You could do anything." Ellie's words ignited a spark in Maria. She couldn't let Diana win. She couldn't let her family down. That afternoon, Maria made a decision. She walked into the rehearsal space with her head held high, her resolve unshakable. Diana was there, of course, lounging on a plush chair as the crew set up. Maria marched straight toward her, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous room. Diana looked up, surprised but unimpressed. "Maria," Diana drawled, crossing her legs elegantly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Maria stopped in front of her, her hands clenched at her sides. "I know what you're doing," she said, her voice steady but filled with quiet fury. "The rumors, the blacklisting, it's all you." Diana raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "Rumors, blacklisting? I have no idea what you're talking about." "Cut the act, Diana," Maria snapped. "You're scared. You see what I can do, and it terrifies you." Diana's smile disappeared, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "You're delusional," she said, standing to face Maria. "Do you really think you can compete with me? You're nothing, just a backup singer who got lucky." Maria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We'll see about that." The tension crackled between them like a live wire, but Maria didn't wait for Diana's response. She turned on her heel and walked away, her heart racing. For the first time, she felt the fire inside her burning brighter than her fear. Diana could try to tear her down, but Maria wasn't going anywhere. This was her fight now, and she was ready to win. The grand ballroom glittered with chandeliers, each crystal reflecting the golden light that bathed the room in warmth. Tables lined with white linens and extravagant centerpieces surrounded the stage, where a grand piano stood waiting. The crowd buzzed with anticipation, a sea of well-dressed producers, philanthropists, and influential figures mingling with glasses of champagne in hand. This wasn't just any event. It was the kind of evening where careers were made, reputations solidified, and dreams either took flight or crashed. Maria stood backstage, her heart pounding as she adjusted the shimmering emerald dress she had borrowed from a boutique that had agreed to sponsor her. She felt like a stranger in it, the elegance of the gown a stark contrast to the weight of everything she carried with her. Her mother's hospital bills, Ellie's tuition, and of course, the looming shadow of Diana. Maria inhaled deeply, clutching the microphone in her hand. This was her moment, the opportunity she fought so hard to reach. Sam had pulled every string to get her on this stage, and she couldn't afford to let nerves take over. She peeked through the curtain, scanning the crowd, and froze. Sitting near the front, in a dress that shimmered even brighter than her own, was Diana. Maria's stomach twisted into knots. What was she doing here? Diana caught her eye, and for a fleeting moment, Maria saw a glint of amusement on her rival's face. It was the kind of look that said, "I'm here to watch you fail." "Maria," Sam whispered, coming up behind her. His reassuring hand rested on her shoulder. "Are you ready?" "I think so," Maria replied, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "You've got this," he said, his tone firm. "Forget about the crowd, forget about Diana, just sing." Maria nodded, but as Sam walked away, the fear inside her grew. She had worked tirelessly for this night, every rehearsal, every late-night recording session, every tear shed in frustration, but Diana's presence felt like a thundercloud threatening to unleash a storm. The host took the stage, his voice booming through the speakers as he introduced Maria. The applause was polite but restrained. She was an unknown, after all, just another performer on the lineup. But as Maria stepped into the spotlight, the murmurs died down. Her breath caught as she faced the sea of expectant faces, the bright lights nearly blinding her. The first notes of the piano filled the air, soft and delicate, and Maria gripped the microphone tightly. Her voice wavered slightly as she began, but she quickly found her footing. The melody swelled, and her voice rose with it, each note carrying a raw, emotional power that silenced the room. She sang like she was pouring her soul into every word, her voice a mix of strength and vulnerability that demanded attention. The crowd leaned in, captivated. Even Diana, despite herself, seemed unable to look away. Maria's performance was magnetic, her voice weaving a story that transcended the lyrics. For the first time, Maria felt completely in control, as if the stage belonged to her and her alone. And then, disaster struck. Halfway through the performance, the microphone cut out. The sound of her voice vanished, leaving only the faint echo of the piano. Gasps rippled through the audience and Maria froze, her heart plummeting. She turned her head slightly and caught sight of Diana at the side of the stage, her expression unreadable but her posture suspiciously relaxed. Maria's mind raced. This was it. Her one chance, slipping through her fingers like sand. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, the confusion palpable. For a moment she wanted to cry, to run off the stage and disappear. But then she saw Ellie's face in her mind, her sister's unwavering belief in her. She thought of her mother, who had always told her that her voice was a gift, and her father, whose memory pushed her to be brave. Maria stepped forward, abandoning the microphone entirely. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and sang. Her unamplified voice soared through the room, cutting through the noise and silencing the whispers. It was raw, powerful, and utterly mesmerizing. The piano followed her lead, the notes swelling to match the intensity of her voice. The audience was spellbound. People leaned forward in their seats, their eyes wide as Maria's voice filled every corner of the ballroom. The chandelier above seemed to vibrate with the resonance of her performance. She wasn't just singing, she was commanding. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. People stood, their claps thunderous, their cheers echoing like a wave crashing over her. Maria's chest heaved as she took in the sight. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, truly seen, not as a backup or an afterthought, but as the star of the moment. Diana's face was a mask of disbelief. She clapped slowly, her lips pressed into a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Maria stepped off the stage, her legs trembling but her spirit soaring. Sam was waiting for her, his face lit with pride. "You just did the impossible," he said, pulling her into a quick hug. "Every producer in that room is going to want to work with you." As if on cue, two producers approached, their faces eager. "Maria, we need to talk," one of them said, extending his hand. That performance, it was something special. Before Maria could respond, Diana appeared, her smile razor sharp. "Wasn't she lovely?" Diana said, her tone saccharine. "I always knew she had potential. Of course, it helps to have someone like me to guide her." Maria stiffened, but the producers ignored Diana, their focus solely on Maria. "We'd like to set up a meeting," the second producer said. "You have a gift, Maria, and we'd be honored to help you share it with the world." Diana's smile faltered, and Maria met her gaze, feeling a surge of triumph. "Thank you," Maria said, her voice steady. "I'd love to discuss the possibilities." As the producers walked away, Diana leaned in, her voice low and venomous. Don't get too comfortable. One good performance doesn't make you a star. Maria smiled, her confidence unshaken. Maybe not, she replied. But it's a start. Diana opened her mouth to retort, but Maria didn't give her the chance. She turned and walked away, her head held high. The roar of the applause still echoed in her ears, a reminder that she had fought for this moment and won. As she stepped into the night, the cool air washing over her, Maria felt something she hadn't in a long time. Freedom. This was only the beginning, and for the first time, she knew exactly where she was going. The news broke on a rainy Tuesday morning, splashed across every entertainment site like wildfire. Diana Monroe's toxic reign exposed. Insider speaks out. The article was ruthless, detailing years of Diana's mistreatment of her team, her manipulative behavior, and the underhanded tactics she used to stay on top. What made it worse was the source, a former bandmate of Maria's, someone who had seen firsthand how Diana had tried to crush anyone who threatened her spotlight. As the rain tapped against the windows of Maria's apartment, her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Fans, journalists, even strangers flooded her inbox, all asking for a statement. Maria set the phone down and stared out the window, watching the droplets streak down the glass. She didn't feel joy or vindication, just a quiet sort of exhaustion. This wasn't how she'd imagined it ending. Later that day, Maria's manager called. "Maria, you need to get ahead of this," Sam said, his voice steady but urgent. "They're going to ask you for your side of the story." "I don't want to drag her through the mud," Maria said softly. "That's not who I am." Sam sighed on the other end of the line. "I get it, but you also need to protect yourself. If you don't speak up, people will fill in the gaps for you." Maria knew he was right, but the idea of airing out everything, the humiliation, the sabotage, the pain, made her stomach churn. She had already moved past it, hadn't she? She had a career now, a platform. Did she really need to revisit those dark moments? The decision was made for her when Diana released a statement that evening. "I've made mistakes," Diana wrote in a carefully worded post on her social media. "But I've always acted with the intention of protecting my art. If I hurt anyone along the way, I deeply regret it." It was vague, calculated, and utterly devoid of sincerity. Maria read it twice, then set her phone down. This wasn't an apology, it was damage control. The next day, Maria agreed to an exclusive interview. The studio was quiet, the camera lights warm against her skin as the interviewer sat across from her. "Maria," the woman began, her tone gentle but probing. "The world has seen the stories about Diana. People are calling you the breakout star who stood against her. What's your response to all of this?" Maria took a deep breath. "I don't think of myself as someone who stood against Diana," she said carefully. "I think of myself as someone who stood for myself. For too long, I let people decide my worth. I let fear keep me in the background. But I realized that my voice, my story, deserved to be heard." She paused, her eyes steady on the interviewer. "Diana and I had our differences, and yes, some of her actions hurt me deeply. But I believe in growth. I believe people can change." The interview aired that evening, and the response was overwhelming. People praised Maria's grace, her refusal to stoop to Diana's level. But they also turned their scrutiny toward Diana, questioning the authenticity of her apology. Over the next few weeks, Diana's career began to unravel. Venues canceled her shows, sponsors dropped her, and the industry distanced itself from her toxic reputation. For the first time, Diana wasn't in control, and it showed. Paparazzi photos captured her looking disheveled, her trademark confidence replaced by a wary, haunted expression. Meanwhile, Maria's star continued to rise. Her album, a blend of classical and contemporary styles, topped the charts. Critics called it a masterpiece, praising not just her vocal talent but the raw emotion she poured into every track. She used her newfound platform to highlight underrepresented artists, hosting workshops for aspiring singers and creating a foundation to support struggling musicians. "This is for the dreamers," she said at the launch event. "For the ones who feel unseen. Your voice matters." One evening, as Maria was rehearsing for a benefit concert, a knock at her dressing room door startled her. She opened it to find Diana standing there, her once perfect demeanor replaced by vulnerability. Her hair was loose, her makeup minimal, and her eyes betrayed a nervousness Maria had never seen before. "Can we talk?" Diana asked, her voice quiet. Maria hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. Diana sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the air thick with unspoken tension. Finally, Diana looked up, her eyes glistening. "I owe you an apology," she said. "A real one." Maria crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. "I'm listening." Diana took a shaky breath. "I was awful to you. Jealous, threatened, petty, all of it. I thought that if I could keep you down, I'd stay on top, but I see now how wrong I was. You have something special, Maria. Something I could never take away. I'm sorry for everything." Maria studied her, searching for any sign of insincerity. But Diana's voice trembled, and her eyes held a sadness that seemed genuine. "Thank you for saying that," Maria said finally. "It doesn't erase what happened, but I appreciate it." Diana nodded, her shoulders slumping in relief. I needed you to know." As Diana stood to leave, Maria stopped her. "Diana," she said, her tone softer now. "I hope you find peace, and I hope you use this as a chance to grow." That night, Maria stepped onto the stage of the benefit concert, the audience erupting into applause as the spotlight found her. Her mother and Ellie sat in the front row, their faces glowing with pride. Maria smiled, her heart full. She thought of her father, of the countless nights she'd spent doubting herself, and of the journey that had brought her here. As she sang, her voice soared, carrying not just the weight of her struggles but the promise of what lay ahead. When the concert ended, Maria joined her family backstage. Ellie threw her arms around her, beaming. "You were amazing," she exclaimed. Maria laughed, hugging her tightly. "I couldn't have done it without you." Her mother, sitting nearby, reached out to take Maria's hand. "You've given us so much, Maria," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your father would be so proud." Tears pricked Maria's eyes, but they were tears of joy. She had bought a new home for her family, a place where her mother could rest comfortably and Ellie could thrive. But more than that, she had given them hope. A reminder that no matter how hard the journey, it was always worth fighting for. As the night wound down, Maria stood by the window of her dressing room, gazing out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed with messages from fans, producers, and fellow artists, all celebrating her success. But one message stood out, a simple note from Diana. "Thank you," it read. Maria stared at it for a moment, then put the phone down, a faint smile on her lips. The future was bright, and Maria was ready for it. She had found her voice, and nothing could silence it now. The stadium lights dimmed, and a ripple of anticipation swept through the crowd like a wave. Tens of thousands of fans raised their phones, their flashlights glowing like stars in the vast darkness. A single piano note rang out, soft and deliberate, and the crowd erupted into cheers. Backstage, Maria took a deep breath, her hand resting lightly on Ellie's shoulder. Her sister's eyes sparkled with excitement, the same unshakable belief that had carried them both through the darkest days. "Are you ready?" Maria whispered, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. Ellie nodded, clutching the microphone in her hand. "More than ready." Maria smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Then let's do this." The stage came alive with golden light as Maria stepped into the spotlight. The cheers hit her like a tidal wave, a sound so powerful it felt like it could lift her off the ground. She stood still for a moment, soaking it in, letting the love and energy of the crowd wrap around her like a warm embrace. This wasn't just a concert, it was a culmination of everything she had fought for, every setback she had overcome, every sleepless night spent chasing a dream that had once felt impossible. The music swelled and Maria began to sing. Her voice soared through the stadium, pure and unwavering, carrying with it all the pain, joy, and resilience that had shaped her journey. The crowd swayed to the melody, their voices joining hers as they sang along to the words that had become anthems of hope for so many. Each note was a reminder of how far she had come, how far they all could go if they refused to give up. As the song ended, Maria turned toward the wings of the stage and extended her hand. Ellie stepped into the light, and the crowd erupted again, their cheers deafening. Ellie's smile was radiant, and as she joined Maria at the microphone, the sisters exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. "This one," Maria said, her voice carrying over the noise, "is for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. For everyone who's been underestimated, overlooked, or silenced. Tonight, we sing for you." The band struck up a new song, one Maria and Ellie had written together in the quiet hours of the night, weaving their memories and dreams into the melody. Ellie's voice blended with Maria's, the harmony a perfect reflection of their bond. The audience was mesmerized, their cheers giving way to a hushed awe as the sisters poured their souls into the performance. When the final note faded, the stadium erupted into applause, the sound echoing into the night. Maria and Ellie stood hand in hand, tears glistening in their eyes as they took in the crowd's energy. Maria raised her microphone, her voice steady but full of emotion. "Thank you," she said, her gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. "Thank you for believing in me, for believing in us. This isn't just my victory, it's yours too. Let this be a reminder that no matter how many times life tries to knock you down, you can rise. You can shine." Backstage, Maria sank into her dressing room chair, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The walls were lined with bouquets and notes from fans, but her eyes were drawn to a simple framed photograph on the table. It was a picture of her father, taken on the day he had given her her first microphone. He was smiling, his eyes filled with pride, and beneath the photo was a handwritten note he had left her years ago. "Your voice is your power. Never let anyone take it from you." Maria traced the edge of the frame with her fingers, her chest tightening with a mix of grief and gratitude. "We did it, Papa," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We finally did it." Ellie burst into the room, her face glowing with excitement. "Maria, did you hear? People are already calling it the concert of the year. And there's a line of producers outside who want to talk to you." Maria laughed, the sound light and unburdened. "Let them wait," she said, pulling Ellie into a hug. "This moment is ours." Later that night, as the crowd dispersed and the stadium lights dimmed for the last time, Maria stood by the edge of the stage, looking out at the empty seats. The weight of her journey settled over her, not as a burden, but as a testament to her resilience. She thought of the young girl who had once doubted her worth, who had let others' cruelty define her. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had reclaimed her power, her voice, and her purpose. Maria's music had become more than just songs, it was a movement. Across the world, aspiring artists drew inspiration from her story, finding courage in her lyrics and strength in her resilience. She had built something bigger than herself. A legacy that honored her father's memory and gave hope to those who needed it most. As she turned to leave the stage, Maria caught sight of Diana standing near the exit, her posture hesitant. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then Diana nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had both taken, though on vastly different paths. Maria nodded back, her expression calm, and turned and walked away, the sound of her heels echoing through the quiet stadium. Outside, Ellie waited by the car, holding the bouquet of roses a fan had handed her. "Ready to go?" she asked, her smile wide and full of promise. Maria glanced back at the stadium one last time, then at her sister. "More than ready," she said. Together, they climbed into the car, the road ahead illuminated by the bright lights of the city. As they drove away, Maria felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest. This was just the beginning, and she couldn't wait to see where the journey would take her next.